Conscious Pathways, the podcast where we explore the intersection of education and social justice through transformative conversations in education. I'm your host, Brittney, and today I have a wonderful guest to share with you, Raphael Bonhomme. Raphael currently teaches third grade in Washington, D.C., where he incorporates social justice and restorative justice practices into his classroom. He aims to bring in real-life challenges along with classroom concepts so that his students can be empowered to take action and become empathetic, open-minded, and global citizens. What I loved most about this conversation with Raphael was just how easy he was to talk to. He has such a calm and confident demeanor and such a wealth of knowledge and education and just a hunger for knowledge and growing that it just was such an empowering and delightful conversation to have. We talked about everything from social justice, restorative practices. We talked about project-based learning, our love for Reggio Emilia schools. And if you're ready to learn, laugh, and just grow, then let's hop into this conversation. Hello and welcome to Conscious Pathways. Really excited to have you.
Thank you.
Of course. So I always like to start with my guests and tell me a little bit more about how you became an educator. What was your inspiration to join the world of education?
So to join the world of education, I first didn't think I would get into education. And even as of recently, I've been trying to unpack that. What I've noticed, I'm a very giving and nurturing person. That wasn't something that was really accepted growing up, but now as an adult, I've learned to kind of embrace that part of me. Back to your question. Getting into education, I was really into art as a kid. So I wanted to do art advertising when my mom was like, "Hey, you got to go to college. That's a non-negotiable." So I had visited a few colleges in the Northeast region. I grew up most of my life in Connecticut, so I looked at some schools over there, and then I looked in the DC DMV area where I currently live. And yeah, honestly, my grades just didn't get me into any of the colleges that I visited. So it's 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 interesting that now I am an educator in my own growth with that. Just wasn't motivated in high school. There wasn't anything that was motivating me. But once I got into my first college, a small state college in Connecticut, I started out doing art. After like one semester, I really didn't like how the instructors were telling me what to do, and there was deadlines on it with art. I just It's in and out in terms of I have to be in the mood to kind of do art. So my mother, who was a single parent mother, advised me to do education because I had always taken care of my younger brothers. Now, as an adult, like I said, as of recently, I reflected on those comments because I actually had no choice. It was like, hey, my mom was working a lot and I had to step up to the plate, right? But at my 19-year-old mind, I was like, yeah, you have a point. So
that older sibling syndrome. It's
exactly.
real.
It's a real thing. It's a real thing.
It is.
That in conjunction with me reflecting on why am I in college, and a lot of my peers who I was close to at the time were not going to college. I I felt as if they were just as intelligent as I was, but they didn't have people in their lives to motivate them and to guide them and to be a mentor and say, hey, you can take the skills and different things that you were smart at and transfer it this way, go to college, get the experience, and also meet other people from different areas. And that social aspect is very key about college as well. So those two big things, when I came to the realization, like, hey, art, I'm in and out of it. I'm in the mood. I can't do it with deadlines and things of that nature.
Yep.
So I jumped into it. At my first college, it was they made you double major, so I was elementary education and history, and both of those fields I just fell in love with. I've always been in love with history, and I spent maybe 2 more semesters at that college. Transferred to Howard University, the Mecca, and I got my master's, and I got my undergrad in history, and then my minor actually in art. I still had enough art credits by that, so I got my minor in art, and then I received my master's in elementary education. So that's how I got into education.
Wow.
Yeah.
I definitely feel you. I have a lot of younger siblings as well. And so I grew up with the duality because I grew up with my mom and I just had an older brother. And when I would come back to the West Coast for summer, I would have all these other younger siblings. So
Mm.
I transitioned from the youngest role to the oldest role.
Mm.
And yeah, you just kind of get thrown into being the surrogate parent sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And like even eventually, once I became an educator, my two younger brothers eventually came and lived with me here in DC. So it was that role kind of continued. You know what I mean?
mhm,
So I am an elementary educator, but I've had the
mhm,
experience of seeing what teenagers go through and going to those
yes.
teenage parent teacher conferences and having them,
Mhm,
be on them for that. But yeah, that eldest sibling,
mhm.
it's definitely a real thing, that position.
Yes, shout out to all those older siblings out there.
Yeah,
Y'all
facts.
just got an extra job that y'all didn't even ask for. So
Didn't even ask for it. Facts.
I get it. What drew you to elementary school teaching?
So that's a good question. As I said, my initial reasoning for getting into it because of me transitioning from art, the comments that my mom made, as well as like some personal reflections. But then something so simple as I can't teach any kids that are taller than me because I know if I get in the classroom and there's a kid taller than me, there's going to be a power dynamic, right? So just off the rip, off of that, I knew, hey, I need to be in grades where the potential of a kid being taller than me is very, very minimal. And like a few years ago, there was a kid like his eyes were right here at my nose. And at my current school, there's a kid who's in kindergarten. Kindergarten. His eyes are to my chest. So I'm like, oh man, I might have to go down in grade level since it's getting to this point. I don't know what kids are eating nowadays, but
They're built different.
yeah, they're built different.
They're
Very,
just
very
built
different.
different.
So that is what drew me initially. I'm not even gonna lie, I'm not
Mhm.
even gonna front. That is the main thing of why I chose elementary education. However, when I took those courses at my first college, it really opened my mind to how I was taught when I was in elementary school, and there was a lot of rote teaching and
Mhm.
unpacking a lot of concepts, especially in mathematics, going from going from um, memorizing facts with multiplication to then unpacking it and then seeing like what does 3 times 4 actually mean? What does four
Mhm.
times three actually mean? Why are they different? You know, so
Mhm.
that really helped me understand the conceptual understanding once I got into those courses, and I just felt it was like easy. So, like I was saying before, in high school, I'm not embarrassed to say it, but my GPA was probably like a 2.7. It wasn't good, and yeah, once I got into education in my higher education, I eventually graduated magna cum laude. Like it was just
Mhm.
it just came naturally. Like I just fell in love with it,
Mhm.
So I'm still doing it. So
I love that. I love that transition from not being super passionate about education in your K through 12 years, right? Because as you mentioned, there's a lot of that rote learning. It's sometimes the passion is kind of lost in it and you don't feel excited about it,
yeah,
and that motivation isn't there. I always find it really interesting. We want kids to be intrinsically motivated to go to school and do these things, but given the choice, like I probably wouldn't want to sit in a one building for that long period of
no,
time every single day,
mm-mm.
taking classes that I don't want to take. Like, it's hard enough in college. Like, put myself in elementary school, middle school, high school. I get
Yeah,
it.
yeah, most
Like,
definitely.
that's not easy. That's a tall order that you're asking of adolescents whose frontal lobe is not even fully developed yet. Like,
I know, and they say people's brains stop developing at 25. I was having a conversation about this over this recent visit to California with some friends, and I don't know who they did that, who the study was done on, but that study needs to be updated
Mm.
because yeah, I feel as if it is probably older than that. Where
Mm.
people's brains are fully developed just based upon, especially with the increase in technology and whatnot. So to
Yes.
to bring that to elementary school, right? The attention span has just decreased so much, which has affected
Yes.
education as a whole. And then you have a group of individuals who are like, yeah, kids aren't the same as what they used to be. And then you have we shouldn't have to do this, have to do that. And those people are still in education, right? They are passionate about
Mm-hmm.
helping kids. And then you have another group of people who are like trying to do engaging things, out of the box things, blah 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 blah. And sometimes I fit into that category where we take risk, and sometimes it could
Mm-hmm.
backfire, and sometimes it could go well for us, whether it be with admin or maybe the project that we tried to implement just didn't go the way that we wanted it to go. Maybe the kids didn't
Mm-hmm.
really receive it the way we thought they would receive it. And then there's probably
Mm-hmm.
other categories that fit. I don't like to really think binary, but there was a lot of groups and a lot of thinking in education right now, especially with the short attention span of students.
Yes.
And I could be
Yes.
making this short attention span up, but if you ask a lot of educators, they'll probably be like, yes, the attention span has decreased tremendously. It's a pandemic.
It is. It is. And I am very curious to see that data that is inevitable. It's going to come out
Yeah,
about these attention spans and especially after COVID, these attention spans and the increase in technology and the increase in social media.
yeah,
I even noticed it in myself. Like I'll just be
facts.
on TikTok randomly sometimes. Like, how did I get here? Like, get off of this app.
It's a fact.
Like I have to hide it sometimes, otherwise I'm just like on it, and I'm like, no, no, get off.
Yeah,
Like, go
yeah,
do something productive with your life, please.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's so true. The attention spans I do feel like have gotten a lot shorter for young people, and I think that's also contributing to some of the challenging behaviors that we do see. I can only speak from the early childhood perspective, but those challenging behaviors have been really, really tricky, especially after post pandemic. You know, it's been really tricky. So I know there's some good data that is just being studied right now, and in just a couple of years, we're going to see some really fascinating data points coming
Yeah.
out.
I know people don't believe certain things until the data comes out, as if
Right.
there aren't any truth to that. So, you know,
As if people aren't on the ground actually seeing the things happening and actually experiencing
yeah,
these things.
exactly.
Um, So, speaking of, you mentioned, just being in the classroom and seeing these attention spans, how is that kind of affecting your, day to day in the classroom, especially working with, young elementary school students? How does that impact your curriculum planning and how does that impact the way that you approach education in general?
So the way that is at first it was tricky for me. My undergrad was
Mm-hmm.
in history, and I love history, right? So the way that history is usually taught is very lecture style. In college
Mm-hmm.
and even growing up, it was very lecture style. So what's fascinating is that even though I did switch majors, art became a very big component of my teaching pedagogy and teaching
Mm-hmm.
style. I would say that I'm an arts integrated teacher. That's how I first started. I had the opportunity to, when I was still at Howard, to be a art coordinator at an after school program here in DC. So I got to practice certain things with incorporating art, but then some, just not, hey, some arts and craft like that. It would be like learning and art, something that had to do with
Mm-hmm.
history and art, you know. And once I got into the classroom, I, like I said, I took those risks of, how do I take this concept? How do we use art in this? How do we get both realms to kind of fuse together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the first school that I actually taught in was a quote unquote arts integration school. They were trying their hardest to be arts integrated. However, they had a plethora of access to other resources. The Phillips Collection, which is here in DC, the Kennedy Center, which is here in DC. So I had an opportunity to go to a lot of workshops, sessions, um, professional development, so I could learn about different art integrated methods, skills that really, really, really were beneficial to my toolbox, and then just got me more curious to try new things. So, all that being said, I say all that because that is that helps me engage kids. I wish it could be every day, but this isn't Magic School Bus, and I ain't got the source like that. But you know, maybe every 2 months, I put a project together. Currently, right now, I know Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month is done. I was informing my students about the aftermath of Puerto Rico and how there are a lot of towns still affected. So they did something in the art class. I read them different books, and I said, you know what, this isn't like, I felt as if I didn't accomplish enough and that the students didn't really get connected. Like it just felt surface level. So we were also learning about natural disasters in science. I've been having the kids build these little paper house models and then putting them in, making different neighborhoods. I have different groups making different neighborhoods, and they would have to put them in an array. So that incorporated multiplication. Then they have to make math word problems about their neighborhoods with the array, right? And then they get to decorate it. And then on top of what they learn, they get to use their creativity to think about, how can we make these neighborhoods safe for an upcoming hurricane? Because Puerto Rico and a lot of the other Caribbean islands are just more prone to get hit by hurricanes. So, what are some things that they can do, the kids, do to kind of design and model it? And in my classroom, the groups of kids that I already had prior to this project are the architects, builders, and the engineers. So I was kind of just showing them this is real world. This is in the real world. This is what those individuals and those people with those roles actually have to do. They build the models, they have the conversations, they get creative, blah, blah, blah. So that's what we're in the process of doing. And that kind of gets it more engaging when you get more hands on and they get to tap into their creativity as well. I would say that engages them, and that it's also a limited amount of technology that they have to use. So it relies more on their creativity.
That is so amazing, and really taking in, real life experiences that, people are actually out there doing. They're actually out there, doing these things in the real world. So bringing that into the classroom, it also connects to what those students are also seeing in their community or seeing in their home, and really helps them to be engaged with the curriculum, because it's not just sit there while I tell you about these things to learn. I think, in my history classes or in any of my classes, really, the ones that are the most memorable and the ones that stand out to me are when the curriculum was engaging, when I could be actively in part of it, or I was learning about something that I was super interested in, which was kind of rare. But unless it was something that was special interest of mine, or I was a part of it, or there was that art component to it, right? I was also a very creative kid, so I loved art. Anything that had creative and I could do things with was something that really stood out to me. And I know for students, that's kind of how they get engaged. That's how they learn, by doing things, by being a part of things, by, opening their horizons and learning about things in different ways, going back to our, learning styles, even incorporating our different learning styles into our curriculum is another way to help keep students engaged in topics and keep them wanting to learn more, and having that natural curiosity and that hunger for learning is so incredible.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely.
mhm. And so I think That's a lot of reason why I did want to reach out to you, because I know you have, a lot of experience with that project-based learning, which is essentially kind of what you were describing about how you were keeping your students engaged is through this idea of project-based learning. So what is that? How would you explain that to someone who didn't know what project-based learning is?
So project-based learning is an umbrella term in which there are a lot of techniques, a lot of activities that can fit under that umbrella. So don't quote me. I've done project based and I've had conversations about like, no, what's project based? Like even most recently, I'm on a team here in DC working with the district about trying to push more projects district wide. So it's like a multi-year project, but I would say from the work that I've done, project based learning is essentially taking an idea, a concept that students are trying to learn, making it apply to the real world, and that can come in various ways. So that could come through kids getting some kind of exposure outside of the classroom, learning. So exposure outside, like leaving the actual school building, getting real world type of application, um, thinking about having this grand question and trying to find solutions to it through various different routes, right? Whether that be creating and building things, whether that be making videos, which is still creating things, whether that be taking action and making proposals and sending it to your mayor, your local government leader. So there's different varieties like that. The type of project based learning that I've done that I felt very firm in, and I've been doing for a long time, has to do with more along the lines of experiential learning technique. So doing role plays in my classroom and simulations in my classroom for kids to kind of dive into these positions where they are part of whatever concept that we're learning about. It's usually that is more like on the social studies, and but for them to feel because a lot of humans learn more through stories and narratives, right? Before even now, people watch movies and listen to podcasts. Most of the learning comes from other people's stories. So, history it has the word story in there, right? But these narratives get passed down from generation to generation. What we do gets captured in a story form. Disney makes billions of dollars off creating different stories. So yeah, that is the tech. Those are the techniques that I say I would be more grounded in because I've done them before. But project based learning overall, like I was saying, started to go in loops. I got to practice on being more concise. But project based is just project based learning is taking these ideas, taking an issue, a dilemma, a question, and trying to solve it in a non-traditional to the USA education system approach. So being hands-on, leaving the traditional classroom, getting some visitors to come in. I would say those are components of project-based learning. It's hard for me to get it all in one sentence. That's the difficult part.
I get it. There's big broad topics too that I feel really passionate about. That someone's like, well, what is it? I'm like, okay, well, take a seat because we're going to talk about everything. Yeah. I can't just condense this into one thing. There's so much nuance. There's so many things. There's so many bits and pieces to this. How can I just tell you one thing? Yeah, I get it. That was great. I love that because project-based learning, like you said, it is pretty kind of umbrella term, and there's all these different aspects or ways that you can work within that. In my last school, so I worked in a Reggio Emilia based preschool, and that was my favorite preschool to work with. And it was wonderful. And we did a lot of project learning within those types of classrooms. So really, like you said, posing a question to the students. And as you mentioned earlier, sometimes I come in with my idea of curriculum and what we're going to talk about and what we're going to do, and the kids don't care. I could not care less about the question that I'm posing, could not care less about the activity. So I quickly learned to follow the children's lead. So I kind of shifted and I was like, okay, let me observe what are they actually interested in? What do they have questions about, rather than here's the question that I have that we are going to learn about now. Works a little bit with older students, but when you got 2-year-olds, if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. So you gotta get creative. And I started learning, okay, well, what are they interested in, and how can I grow off of that? How can I build in all of these? In early childhood, we have these different domains that kind of leads our curriculum in the way that we do. So, obviously social, emotional, cognitive, gross motor, fine motor, all these different domains that we look at for young students, and then taking that and also what they're interested in. So if they were interested in transportation, like most preschool students are, they love cars, they love bicycles, boats, planes, anything that moves from point A to point B, they are super interested in, especially the garbage truck. I don't know what it is about preschool students and the garbage truck, but it's a celebrity every time. Trash day is the best day ever. So I might observe that my students were looking at or feeling really excited about transportation things. Then I'm like, okay, that's my end. That's what I'm going to start asking questions about. So now I'm asking a little bit of questions during circle time about what are their questions? Are they curious about how things move? Are they curious about speed? Is it fun to them because it goes fast? Can I then create a science experiment where we are learning about speed, where we're learning about these different things using the cars, right? Or is it just the colors? Or is it just, what is it that they're interested in? And then really growing from that. So one classroom, we had a bus bench like right outside of our window. So the kids would just sit there and watch the bus pretty much all day, watch people getting on and off the bus. And so that led us to a really great conversation about, who rides the bus? Have you ridden the bus before? How do you get to school? What does that look like? And from there, it just went to so many different avenues that we started to grow from that one question. And, their questions started to branch out, and we started to do, and as you said, you can incorporate all these other different aspects into one specific project. So we had art projects based off of transportation. We had literature books based off transportation. We had manipulatives based off of transportation, and it was something that gained their interest. And they also got to learn a lot about science, about the science and the mechanics of how they move. We got to talk to an actual mechanic, and that was really fun. And it just really deepened that learning to a way that I don't think it would have if I had just been, okay, this month it's transportation month, so we're going to learn about these things, and then next month we're going to do this, right? Well, for early childhood, it was really following their lead, because they'll tell you what they're interested in. They'll be very outspoken about what they're interested in and what they're not interested in. Sometimes you got to fail, but sometimes you win, and it feels really good to win.
It does, and that's part of life also, right? However, we aren't given grace, and I know there are a lot of people that would probably disagree with that teachers shouldn't be trying out new things with a group of students or whatnot. However, when there are certain institutions such as Harvard, I've gone to a few PDs from Harvard, and some of the things that they've said, I'm like, they got this from other things. Like, they either got this from other ethnic groups who have been doing this for years and they rebranded it, or like I've seen this in somebody else's classroom called this, or they didn't have a name for it. They just didn't monetize off of it or try to repurchase it or rebrand it. So I work at a Reggio Emilia school currently too, so that's fascinating.
Hi there, editing Brittney. I realized that we got really excited during his conversation when we were talking about Reggio Emilia, and completely forgot to take a moment to explain what that was. So Reggio Emilia is a philosophy of education that grew from a real place, Reggio Emilia in Italy after the Second World War. It's an approach to education that is very constructivist, it's student-centered, student-driven, and follows a lot of experiential learning. Hence why we're both talking about it in this podcast, where we're bringing up project-based learning. It's a program that we both worked in. We're both really excited about, but I wanted to take a moment to just kind of explain what that is, because we just took the ball and just started running. And not everyone knows what Reggio Emilia is. So I'll also link some things in our show notes. So if you're curious to learn more about Reggio Emilia, it'll be there. And then we'll get back into the episode. So, cool. Reggio schools.
Yeah.
They're the best. I think if I were gonna go back to teaching again, I think it would probably have to be another Reggio school. I've worked in, public funded schools. I've worked in other privately funded schools. I've done full inclusion schools, which I also loved. But my heart always goes back to Reggio Emilia. I love it. I love the philosophy. I love the history of it. I love the the ability to do project-based learning, to be able to do play-based learning. It's great.
It's I'm not sure what age or what grade this Reggio schools that you've worked in went to, but mine goes up to fifth grade, and I find it. We have found it to be trickier to implement some of the core routines or the core actions of Reggio, especially from third grade up, because this is where we start to standardize testing. Feel me? So
yeah.
that in incorporation with just it's the way that it's ordered. Kids are, especially when it comes to reading, kids are learning how to read by second grade. Or they're learning to read, and then by third grade, they're reading to learn. Right? Those are the expectations. Like it flips right there. That's when it changes direction.
That's tricky.
And a lot of kids aren't there yet. They're still learning to read. So that puts them at a deficit. So that gets overemphasized versus incorporating some of these projects and taking time to allow kids to be creative. And it's a hard balance because kids were used to that in the earlier grades, and now the expectations of ELA and mathematics has increased tremendously, right?
Yeah.
And
seemingly just overnight for them.
Overnight. Yeah. So as I've been teaching third grade for so many years, I've come to really like that because it is a pivotal year. It is. They have so much, as you've done work with the school to prison pipeline, right? There's a lot of data talking about how students perform in third grade and their trajectory throughout education here in the American education system. It's messed up. It's messed up. So when that data comes out, by third grade, they failed to mention everything that came before third grade. So with the emphasis on third grade, it's been tricky. So sometimes, as we mentioned, it's a balancing act for me, especially. How much projects do I want to do? When is the right time to do it? And I'm not perfect at all. I'm not the enlightened one.
Although they expect us teachers to be perfect at all times and to always have the right answers and always do the right things, and we're not. We're just people. We're just people out here peopling. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm trying my hardest.
We trying. Exactly. You just secretly uncovered one of my favorite things. It's not my favorite thing, but it's just like something that just like irks me about reading and teaching children to read, is that we do expect that shift from that second grade to third grade, and that expectation that, all right, now you know how to read, and now we're gonna, read for comprehension and doing all these different things, when we actually look at the data and we look at their brain chemistry and we look at how students learn. And by third grade, they're usually about 8 years old, right? Like, before then, they're just reading, not really even reading, they're just memorizing patterns at that point. It's just pattern recognition. And then we expect them to then read to comprehend when they get to third grade, when they haven't even been reading before then.
Some of these kids, they don't even remember to tie their shoes, or they don't even remember where they left their jacket. But then now it's like, oh, we expect them to read two-step word problems and figure out when to add and subtract and all these various steps. And for real, honestly, this is me talking, representing myself. I feel that those expectations, pushing kids that much, is unrealistic and it's not age appropriate whatsoever. It's not age appropriate whatsoever. And there's a lot of people, there's a lot of companies and systems that get away with it here in this country. However, I still work for the system, right? So I try to do my best to do my best to kind of combat that, or to kind of just bring some kind of light and balance to that. Like I said, I am not the enlightened one, but I try different things.
And that's so important. And yeah, it's like, so in early childhood, I don't know if this is the same thing for K through 12, but we talk a lot about developmentally appropriate practices. So are the curriculum that we're bringing in, are the activities that we're bringing in, are our expectations of our students, is it developmentally appropriate for the students that we have in our classroom right now? So, can I reasonably expect a 3-year-old to sit down in his desk and be quiet for 30 minutes? Not really. That's not developmentally appropriate. Their attention span's not there. It's going to be a lot more stress on me as the educator to sit there and yell at that student multiple times to sit down in their desk, when the more developmentally appropriate thing would be to not have them sitting down for 30 minutes and expecting them to be quiet and to be behaved, right? You're going to get behaviors at that point because they're not ready for that type of activity yet, right? And so when I see that we're doing reading a certain way, or we're doing other activities a certain way, but is this developmentally appropriate for the children in the room right now? And we also know that the students over the last couple of years, even before COVID, but students over the last couple of years have just been through a lot. There's been a lot of shifts, there's been a lot of changes, there's been a lot of expectations, right? And so what was developmentally appropriate for students 10 years ago might not even be the same for the students that we have right now in our classroom, right? And so it's important that we're actually looking at who's in our classroom right now and what are their developmental needs and how can we best support them in their learning. Because it's going to be different. It's going to differ from class to class. I've had classes where my students on a Monday were a completely different vibe than my students on Tuesday. I had some of the same students, but it was a whole different vibe of students. We had to do a whole circle time, just kind of had to be completely different for Tuesday, Thursday group than it did Monday, Wednesday, Friday group.
Let me ask you. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. I was gonna say. Let me ask you a question. For when you were in the classroom, you taught around like 3 and 4-year-olds, or even younger.
Yeah. So we did like preschool. So that's between 2.5 to 5 is preschool age, and then you have infant toddlers as well. So I've taught all the way up to like age 5, and then I've done work with K through 12 students as well. But my specific teaching experience is for under 5, and then my favorite group to teach was 2-year-olds. I love me some 2-year-olds. I'll do that all day.
So from your experience, did you see? You don't have to put a percent to it or anything, but was it common that you saw 2 to 5-year-olds on a tablet or some kind of technology, especially in the last few years?
Not necessarily in the classroom, but based on like the conversations that we would have, they for sure have been on either a tablet or they've been on, a laptop or a game, because they'll talk about, oh, we're on Roblox, or we're doing this, or my favorite character is this. And I'm like, you were 3. Why do you know that?
And the thing is, a few years ago, I read this book by a molecular biologist, but it's called Brain Rules for Babies. And basically, he was talking about how tech devices are not great for the brain of a baby. They can't differentiate what's real and what's not, right? So exposing kids, and that's what I was to go back to what I was saying earlier about, where people's brains are developmentally by 25, like all that's out the window, I believe, until some acclaimed professor with merit does some kind of study, then people are going to believe it. But if, I'm just a third grade teacher, whatever. But that just knowing that, especially after the pandemic or during the pandemic, you had preschool kids on the tablet, on technology all the time, and that type of interaction, right? It's not real, right? What they were getting away with, and then afterwards, when school was done, they were still on their tablets, right? Seeing these things, and that's now their reality, right?
Yep.
So when it's hard for it's just more difficult in the classroom now, because of that, because kids have already experienced that. Even if you're in a household where there are no video games, no tablets, no TVs, and parents are trying to do their best.
And kids getting on social media, and how is that impacting their long term, how's that impacting their long term kind of success? How is that impacting their brain development? There's so much out there that could definitely, like, we know that our brains are very, highly plastic. So it's like they're able to shift and change based on our environment, based on what we're learning, based on what we're doing. So it's a lot. I don't know, man. I could go on for days.
No, that's another conversation.
It's a whole other conversation about social media and the developing brain. But let's switch gears a little bit. So, in addition to the project-based learning, you've mentioned a lot of kind of social justice aspects that you also incorporate into your teaching. So, how have you kind of seen that role of project-based learning and social justice kind of, how's that seen impacting your students?
So I think that students, especially young kids, really want to help out and feel as if they have the power to make a difference, right? So, as you were saying, what are kids interested in? If they were interested in sanitation workers by 3 years old, and then they find out that the sanitation workers aren't getting paid enough and they can't help their family, so they can't pick up the trash anymore. Those kids are going to be upset. They're going to come up with some kind of resolution for that, right? I think, for example, when I was introducing the app, doing some things around Hispanic/Latinx month, that talking about Puerto Rico, like I said, it felt kind of surface level, things that I was doing, reading, showing them the videos, but for them to understand and kind of have empathy and say, like, after 5 years after this hurricane, there's still some there's still some kids your age that don't have access to water, to electricity, to food, to shelter. Like, what how would that affect you? So we had different conversations like that. And what I've noticed too is that being in DC is, people think it's a very diverse city, but it's actually very segregated in terms of, in like, the wealth gap is tremendous. So throughout my teaching experience here in DC, kids feel empowered to stop certain things based on their experiences already in third grade. So I've had kids that are like, hey, let's stop. We need to stop global warming, right? And they feel very motivated to do that. I have some kids who either have seen firsthand or just been in close proximity to gun violence, right? And they want to stop gun violence. just naturally, I feel that kids are they are affected because they're humans. They are affected by things that happen around them, or they hear what is negatively affecting the people around them that they care about, and they absorb that. That becomes part of their identity as well. So, as you were saying earlier, find out what the kids are interested in. I do this thing. It's called the Funds of Knowledge in the beginning of the year. It was actually, rolled out with younger students, but it's to learn more about the families and the cultures of the students that teachers and educators will be working with. I would advise any educator to do that, to look that up, the Funds of Knowledge, and send it out to parents before the school year starts. So then you know how to get parents involved, and you just know about the culture of the students that you'll be working with. It's really helpful and insightful. So all that to say, um, if you know, hey, you got students who come from single family homes or things of that nature, they're gonna feel empowered of like keeping a family together, right? So yeah, the students are going through it too. Adults go through it. Life be lifing for adults, but life be lifing for kids too. So everybody everybody has their own things that they're working through, even kids. So I think it just takes sometimes, because I noticed that there was a trend like kids are like, oh, let's save the turtles, and I'm like, there are real human beings that need support as well in this city, probably 3 blocks away from here. So I think it takes sometimes educators the courage to introduce kids, and you talked about, where they are developmentally, to introduce kids to sometimes what may seem like tough conversations or tough topics, because if you try to hide them and shelter them for too long, once they become an adult and they start to learn about that stuff, they're like, nah, that can't be true. Or it's usually, nah, that can't be true, or it's why didn't I know about this before? And their whole schema of reality is shattered. I mean, sometimes there's some in between, right? Some ability to grow and become curious and come to your own understanding. But yeah, I would definitely say kids are going through their own stuff. They feel empowered to do things. It's up to the educator to kind of get that, but then also exposing them to different realities of what's going on in the world, right? I don't think kids should be sheltered, but then also you shouldn't just go out of pocket. If an educator ever has a question like, should I try this or not? They should definitely ask other well-respected educators first. I'm not saying, hey, just dive in and take that risk. I am not liable for your job security or anything like that. So
don't do that.
yeah, don't take my word for it. I can't hire you, but yeah. So that's really it with social justice things. It's just like, and I think that anything can have a social justice approach, but there are different components for it. Teaching. I'm part of an organization. Well, there's an organization here in DC that even if you're not in DC, you can go on and look at some of their resources. But I'm part of their social justice educator group. I'm a co-facilitator, but it's called Teaching for Change, and they do a lot of we do a lot of great work in terms of taking certain concepts and thinking about being action oriented, how we can bring that back to our classroom, collaborating and planning. We do some of our sessions monthly online, and then sometimes we have them on site, like having a on site experience as well. So, um, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question or if I'm just rambling, going around.
I mean, I feel like I learned a lot, so I'm solid. But no, I think that's really great. Like you said, social justice can be an aspect, any aspect of education can be a social justice aspect, right? And it's all just about the questions that we're asking and what those students are interested in. And there are ways to have, like you said, conversations that can seem really tricky or can seem really difficult or really hard for students, right? Especially, I went to school in LA, and so I was teaching in LA for a little bit. And the school that we were at, there was a lot of homelessness around us. It's LA, and it's a major issue there.
Yeah.
And so the students are seeing homeless people on a fairly regular basis. They're seeing, people on the streets. They're seeing people have, just mental health issues. And they're asking questions because it's a part of their everyday. But, sometimes people would think just because they're in preschool or because they're 2 or 3 that they're not ready to engage in that conversation, but that's a part of their reality.
Yeah.
So what are we actually teaching them about these issues? That it's okay to ignore it,
Yep.
that it's okay to not engage in it, to not ask questions about it, right? We need to be really intentional when we're working with young children, because again, that's something that they're seeing every day. Why would we not talk about that? And we don't have to go into, these like really deep kind of background things, especially with young children, right? We got to do it in a developmentally appropriate way. So where are they developmentally? What are they kind of capable of understanding right now? And breaking that down. And then we can start posing questions of, well, what would you do about this? Or what do you think we can do about this? And asking those questions and kind of seeing their problem solving come up. And, I think we underestimate students a lot, especially early childhood. And, technically early childhood does go up to about like 8 years old. So that's like 3rd grade. And then you go on after that. But we underestimate these young people. We underestimate them so much in their capacity to understand, their capacity to have empathy, their capacity to problem solve and think critically about things. We underestimate them so much to the point that we don't actually engage them in these really important conversations that when we do, it lends its way into everything, right? It's all of the developmental domains, all of our teaching strategies, all of those like standardized things that we need to meet. When we take a social justice component, it does that just in a little bit of a different way, but it does that. It reaches these students in a very different way that I just don't feel like we are engaging with them. And it's sad because they have a lot of really great ideas and they want to be a part of this conversation. And what happens is exactly what you said. We ignore it until we get to the point where we feel like, okay, now you're at the age where we can have a conversation about race. But now they've had many years to sit on these kind of internal biases. They've had many years to sit on these prejudices that they've been hearing from media, hearing from other people. They've had years upon years to sit on that. So now you want to teach them about race. Well, now you got to backtrack a lot. Now we got to unlearn some things that we've already learned. Whereas if we're having these conversations all along in a way, again, that's developmentally appropriate, and of course, speak with other educators who do this and make sure you're doing it in a way that is not harmful to anybody. Because sometimes if we do these things incorrectly, we can be unintentionally causing harm. And we don't want that, right? It's important that we're able to have opportunities to try things out when it comes to our curriculum. But we also do have to be very, very intentional about what we are trying out. And part of that intention is making sure that we are doing a lot of deep research about what our ideas are. We're talking to our admin, we're talking to other educators. Like, build yourself a teaching community first before you just go out and be doing stuff. But these conversations are really important and they can really help young kids to be a part of their educational journey. I have one. What's that?
Nah, I was saying, I agree with a lot of the comments and statements that you were just making.
Thank you. I went on a little tangent there. I was like, I am passionate. We're talking about social justice.
Keep it going. There's no speed camera here. Keep it going.
Hey, but I know that you're on the East Coast, and I can barely exist after a certain time here. So, I have one last question for you, and that is, how do you reimagine education?
So, how do I reimagine education? I think that I could speak about how I would want to reimagine K through 12 education. I really thought that this pandemic would shift things because the system that we have right now is very outdated. It's still very factory style. in which there aren't many cities in this country that run off of factory as a source of economy anymore. Like those are all out of date. So that style of teaching is very prominent. It still exists, and I think that there needs to be more. Right? I think I'm just gonna say some ideas. Right? I'm gonna romanticize how I envision certain things. I think that there needs to be like a 13th grade. I think that certain things need to be spread out. There needs to be more emphasis on social emotional learning. I think that there needs to be more emphasis on field trips. I live in Washington, D.C. I just went on a field trip. I brought my students to our local government building, and it was a task. It took me 2 months to get all this stuff situated, and it's difficult for teachers. It's such a hassle. I know some teachers that had to pay their substitute when they had to go on a field trip. Like it's crazy. So even getting kids to feel and learn in the real world comes at a cost to a teacher, you know. So for more easier access with bringing kids out of the classroom, I think that also there's an overemphasis on standardized testing, that students need to have some kind of digital portfolio that travels with them from whenever they start their school and it goes to fifth grade. Then whenever they choose to go to whatever middle school, they're able to present that. Boom. If I was in middle school, they're able to present that with when they're inquiring and looking at different high schools, and it'll go all the way to college. So it will weigh more than an SAT or ACT or things of that nature, right? And then you can really see the timeline of this child through the different projects, presentations, and just a plethora of different things that they've been able to do, right? Also, I think that it would be great if there were these kind of like fusion grades. It would be like a first, second grade together, a second, third grade together, a third, fourth grade together. So kids that are doing really well with in that second grade, third grade class in math, they may be doing a portion of the day or a certain concept with the third grade group, right? Then you have the other second grade group, and then vice versa. It'll be really fluid about where kids are learning, right? We are told to differentiate certain kids, but still give them grade level stuff. But if a kid is not getting this grade level stuff, we're still pushing them on the factory line. I had a parent ask me that a few like 2 months ago. Like, if my child is this far behind already in the beginning of the year, how did they get here? And I said, to be blunt with you, it's a flaw in the education system where kids keep on getting pushed and they're not ready. They're not ready to get to that next level yet. But they still go down the assembly line. And I would say that there needs to be more respect for educators. In other countries around the world, there's much more respect for educators. And I know this next comment is going to sound really, really trivial and really small, but I think that teachers need more perks. For example, if for most of the times, I would say 90% of the times where I was running late to the airport, it was because it had something to do with education, whether I was talking to a parent, grading papers at the school late. Almost just happened maybe a month ago. I was going to San Antonio, and I was like doing parent teacher conferences, and I looked at the time and I was like, I told the parents I had to catch a flight to San Antonio in about an hour. They were like, okay. And I was like, I'm sorry, I gotta go. But this is like at 5:30 p.m. already. You know what I mean? Like, and I say that because when people who work for the army and military, hats off to them, all respect, when they are late to like get into a plane, they wait. The plane waits for them, you know? Come on, give some teachers some kind of grace and courtesy. Give us a 10, 15-minute wait. We're trying to help and change the world. We're trying to help this country. So I think even a perk like that would be cool, as well as other perks, right? But yeah, I could go on and on and on, romanticizing about how I would want education to be. I would want there to be more more opportunities where students are getting paid, especially if they come from uh, low economic low economic backgrounds, because most times when kids are not attending school, they're trying to find other ways to get money. So if you could lure them in, because it's difficult to realize, in 10, 15 years, if I do well in school, then I can make a lot of money versus I could make a quote unquote a lot of money right now. Right. So being able to counter that type of narrative um, with something better, right? If a kid is skipping school to try to get money, then keep them in school with the same amount of money that they would probably be getting from doing whatever other activities. Hey, I think that we would also save money with the prison system, because a lot of people get very, yeah, they get very angry knowing how much money is spent on the prison system. However, we still have the prison system, and there are other proactive ways of avoiding that, but they don't want. They think that that's too much money, so it's a lot. It's all intertwined, but there's a lot of things I could romanticize in terms of envisioning and reimagining education here in America.
Yes, and we need more educators who are dreaming and dreaming big. Yes, give educators more perks. Every time I hear about all the perks people get for working at Google, I'm like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
just a little
Come
bit
on,
of perks, like
come on now.
yeah, just a little bit of perks. Like it
Come
was
on.
always nice when I would come in and like a student's parent had bought me some coffee, and I'm like, see,
Something
it's a
so
little
simple.
thing,
It's the little
so
things.
simple. You bought me coffee today, like this right here.
Listen, it's the little thing. If every airline said, "Hey, we give 10 or 15% to teachers," I bet you teachers would take more flights. Teachers would
Yeah.
be on those flights.
I mean, just little perks. Give us little perks. Give us like some free airline coupons or something like that.
Exactly.
Or let us into the what is it, the airport lounge. Give us lounge access.
You're right. You're right. Hey,
Like, I
hey.
gotta be at the airport. At least like make it comfy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want fun things. Okay, teachers want to have fun too. Before we go, is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience? Is there any social media, anywhere the audience can reach out to you or see what you're up to?
Yeah. So I post quite a few things. People can add me on LinkedIn. My name is Raphael Bonhomme. I post things on my Instagram page. Well, it's my educator page. It's called Bonhomme Class. BONHOMMECLASS. That's how you spell it.
Okay.
I post a lot of things that I do in my classroom. You can reach out to me via LinkedIn or through the Instagram page. Follow the Instagram page. I would say also the organizations that I talked about, Teaching for Change, great in terms of social justice. There's a lot of other organizations that have worked with Teaching for Change, but in DC, I would say that Teaching for Change is the number one. They do it. We do it. I say we because I've done a lot of work with them for so long, so I could just say I could put me and we as a collective, but
You're part of it at this point.
yeah. If you go on the website, you'll see my face up there.
Well,
But
then yeah, you're
yeah,
part of
yeah,
it.
yeah.
That counts.
So we have done a lot of stuff in the district, and the people who have been there, great people, great values. They're not just trying to monetize off of people. It's straight grassroots to the people, to the educators, social justice, but also has a lot of resources, especially when it comes to children's book, because yeah, it has. They've been putting out diverse list of children's book for decades. Um, but yeah, and project-based learning, experiential learning. I do work with the AFT, so I don't know if any of your listeners are. They're probably part of the AFT as well, the national one of the national unions. But where we do some PDs that have to do with experiential learning and civics and things of that nature. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll put all of those links in the show notes as well. So if you're curious to see anything that Raphael's been working on or want to reach out, I'll put those all in the show notes. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. This conversation was it was so just warm and refreshing and amazing.
Thank you.
I feel energized. I always love talking to other people about social justice and just education and what we can be doing to just make the world a better place and to make education a better place. So just thank you so much, and thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into Conscious Pathways. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to Conscious Pathways wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave a rating or review. It really does help the podcast to grow and reach more listeners just like you. And until next time, I'll be back for more transformative conversations in education. And until then, navigate your conscious journey with kindness and courage, and I'll see you there. Bye!